Welcome. The yin postures in this yoga practice will include Reclined Butterfly pose on a bolster, and then Dragonfly pose while folding over each leg for a period of time in Dragonfly. Then Melting Heart pose, Eye of the Needle twist, both sides, and finally Happy Baby pose. I was going to advertise this practice as a restorative practice, but after practicing it myself several times, it certainly wasn't restorative to me, as many of the postures were pretty intense, so there might be restorative moments in it. But we all have unique beings, we're all different, we all have different ranges of motion. That's the idea behind yoga practice, is to notice your own stopping points and your own feelings of intensity. So a couple of props that will be useful during this practice. Yoga bolster, if you have one, for reclined butterfly pose, although you can always do reclined butterfly without a bolster. Pillows and blankets can do too. And a blanket roll might be useful for variations of some of the postures. This practice will have an astronomical theme to it. It's about the famously hypermassive star system known as Eta Carinae. This practice starts with lying on your back in a prone position and what I call, for lack of a better term, internal rotation pose. It's kind of the counter pose or a prep pose to reclined butterfly pose, but instead of the external rotation of the legs, it's the internal rotation. So actually, let me show you. So you lie on your back, knees bent, feet on the floor, starting hip width apart, and then you go wide with the feet. So you walk the feet away from each other and allow the knees to just fall together if they can. So I'm kind of a little bit faking it here because I'm not very well internally rotated, which means this is a yang pose for me. If I actually relax the muscles in my legs, my knees kind of come back apart. But for those of you who have more internal rotation, this is kind of a restorative posture. You just kind of lie back and rest here. So I'll turn kind of sideways on my mat here. You can use the mat to determine the width of your legs here. And the idea here is, this is where we'll spend a few moments just to gather our thoughts, find our breath here. And feet feel fairly stable on the ground, so if you need to turn the toes out or the toes in to make things a little bit more comfortable, then head, neck, shoulders, arms are comfortable on the ground. And it's time, you take this time to just kind of check in. This is what's called finding your inner ground. It's like, notice your mental thoughts, notice your emotions, notice your breath here. And we'll deepen the breath here in a moment, and we'll go ahead and begin to quiet the body down here. So you can continue with a normal natural breath, or if you want to, next inhale, nice full complete inhale where you feel your torso up completely. And then when you exhale, see if you can create a nice soft prolonged exhale. That's considerably longer than the inhale. So you can continue with this breath. So nice, full, kind of regular, normal inhale. Notice how that fills up your torso. And then a very long and soft and gentle and graceful exhale. And continue this, or if this is too awkward and uncomfortable, just the normal natural breath. So I'm calling this outflow breathing. So for a moment, just visualize yourself as a supermassive star out in the Milky Way. And one thing that supermassive stars are characteristic of is blowing off the outer layers of their atmospheres in what's called an outflow. So I'm calling this outflow breathing. So nice normal inhales where you gather your stellar power up. And then as you exhale, you're kind of blowing off those outer layers in a kind of an outflow of gas and dust and material. Maybe this is more kind of subtle energy type of outflow here. So a few more breaths like this. Again, I'm kind of waving my arms around here, but you have your arms just softly lying on the ground here. Just a couple more breaths here. And then at some point come back to a normal natural breath. Gently roll over to one side. Bring yourself up into a comfortable seat. It can be any seat. I'm going to sit cross-legged, but maybe you'd like to sit another way. Just make sure you have a little bit of room around you. The next warm-up exercise is just a bit of a shoulder opener here. So extend your arms out long to either side, shoulder height, and then turn your palms to face up, bend the elbows, and then bring your hands in to touch your shoulders here. I'm going to make big sweeping elbow circles. So elbows move down and in front of your torso towards each other till they don't go anymore. Maybe they touch, maybe they don't touch, doesn't matter. You're just going until they don't go, and then move the elbows up towards the ceiling, away and around and back as far as they go, and make a few big swooping circles in this. This is actually a shoulder exercise. I'm calling this Eta Carinae shoulders to honor the theme of class here. So we're trying to make these big butterfly movements with the arms. And we're actually trying to feel into the shoulders. So even though the elbows and the arms are what you see when you do this, what you're actually trying to feel is the movement of the shoulder blades and the collarbones and the whole upper body. And so maybe the slower is better. So you can actually feel the front side, the back side of the torso, the whole motion, the complex motion of the shoulders. At some point, switch directions. Do a couple of circles in the opposite way. Just feel how this feels here. And maybe notice your breath again. So one more cycle here. And then we'll do a few yang cobra poses. So make your way onto your belly, legs comfortably extended out behind you. So the feet can be together, they can be hip width apart, whatever is more accessible to you here. We'll do some cobra cycling here, a little bit of just yang back bending here. I'm going to suggest wide arm cobra pose. So instead of having your hands in close to your shoulders, move them out away from your shoulders, maybe 1.5 feet or so, maybe half a meter or so. And then root down, so your elbows are still deeply bent here. Maybe tense your fingers, so the tips of your fingers are on the ground here. And then we'll do 4 rounds of this. So on an inhale, in the first round, just kind of lift your upper body, your head and your neck off the ground in kind of a baby cobra here, so it doesn't have to be too far. And then slowly lower yourself back down to the ground. Then maybe when you get to your next inhale, use the inhale again and bring yourself up slightly a bit higher here. Slightly higher cobra here. And you can keep trying to gain a little bit of height with each cycle. So 2 more cycles. Another inhale and lift yourself up maybe a little bit higher here. And if it was too high, then don't go that high the last time here. So on the last round, lift yourself up. Either challenge yourself to go a little bit higher again, or back yourself off if you're starting to feel some pain. And then maybe stay here for a resting breath or 2. And then slowly bring yourself up. And now we'll get into the first long held yin posture, and this will be reclined butterfly. I'm going to suggest doing it with a bolster to create a slight back bend. But if you don't have a bolster or don't want to use a bolster, you can just do reclined butterfly without the bolster here. So you'll lay back on the bolster. You'll make your version of butterfly legs. So sit with the narrow end of the bolster up against the back of your torso here. And then bend your knees, put the bottoms of your feet together, make your version of butterfly legs. The heels can be pretty far from your hips, or they can be pretty close to your hips. If the knees are feeling achy, then take some sort of a prop, like a block or a bolster or a pillow or a blanket, place it underneath that leg or both legs if both knees are achy here. And then slowly lie back onto whatever you're used to using as a bolster here. Arms are relaxed behind you here. And again, like I said, if you don't have a bolster, you can easily just do this without a bolster. And this will just stay here for a few minutes here. So maybe check in with your breath. For a lot of folks, this can be a fairly restorative posture. This is maybe the only one in this sequence that actually feels really that restorative. So if it is restorative to you, just enjoy this. Give yourself a chance to relax. You may not feel much in this posture. So unless you don't have a lot of external rotation, if you don't, then this is probably pretty intense in the legs and in the hips because of the stopping, whatever that stopping is. Maybe notice what that stopping is here. Send some breath there to calm it down. The nice thing about a restorative posture, it reminds us of what the state we're trying to get in for the rest of the yin posture is a state where the body is quiet, the muscles are relaxed, and then we cultivate the patience to just stay here for some time. So the theme for class is a star known as Eta Carinae. Eta Carinae is a southern star. You can only see it in the southern hemisphere or from very south latitudes. You can't really see it from most of North America or Europe. So it's not a star that you would see if you're a northerner. But if you live in the southern hemisphere, if you live in South Africa or Australia or in South America, this is a star that's high in the sky. In fact, it's circumpolar if you live far enough south of 30 degrees south latitude. It's in the constellation called Carinae, and Carinae is known as the keel of a ship. In the old days, there used to be a giant constellation known as the Ship. Astronomers thought that constellation was too big, so they broke that area of the sky into different constellations. They broke it up into the keel of the ship, the sails of a ship, the poop deck of a ship, and this particular area of sky was named after the main body or the main skeleton or the actual keel of a great floating ship here. And Eta Carinae is one of the stars. It's a rather unremarkable star. It's a star that just glows at fourth magnitude, and so it's definitely not one of the brightest stars, although this constellation that I'm referring to has one of the brightest stars in the night sky, Canopus. Canopus is on the other end of this constellation, and Canopus is the second brightest star visible to the naked eye. So a very bright star. In fact, what's interesting is Eta Carinae is a star that's somewhere in between Canopus, which is the second brightest star in the sky, and the Southern Cross, which is probably the most recognizable and the most famous asterism of stars in the southern hemisphere. So if you're in a place where you can recognize Canopus and where you can see the Southern Cross, then you know you're looking in the right direction to find this seemingly unremarkable star at fourth magnitude, which at fourth magnitude is not very bright at all here. And that's the general area. It actually lies along the plane of the Milky Way. So about 3 or 4 more breaths here in Reclined Butterfly. So if you can see the Milky Way on either, and look near Canopus and near this, in between Canopus and the Southern Cross. You're getting into the vicinity of where this star is. Again, it's unremarkable to the naked eye. When you start examining it scientifically with real powerful instruments like the Hubble Space Telescope, it turns into a whole different, the whole character of the star changes dramatically here. So we're slowly coming out of Reclined Butterfly. You can kind of maybe wiggle yourself awake, bring the knees back up together, roll slowly and safely off of your bolster if you were using a bolster. Bring yourself up to seated. And then from here, we'll begin to, if there's a little bit of reverberation you want to feel, please do that. And any kind of counter motion you would like to do that. But we'll set up for the next posture, which is two Dragonfly poses with a forward fold over each leg. And there'll be a slight modification here. For those of you who have a lot of tightness in the backs of your leg or the backs of your torso, maybe a little bit of height is handy. I'll certainly sit up on a little bit of height. Maybe some of you don't need any height, but I'm going to sit up on a block because I find a couple inches of sturdy prop helps me a lot here. Dragonfly is extend your legs and then take them out as wide on either side as they go for you. And they're extended and maybe they're straight for you or maybe they're slightly bent. This is where a blanket roll comes in handy. Maybe one leg is painfully straight and it needs to stay bent. And so you can keep it bent by placing a blanket roll under whatever knee is bothering you here. Otherwise, if they aren't bothering you, then this is Dragonfly here. We're going to add a forward fold to this, so we'll be doing Dragonfly twice, once over each leg here. So grow tall through your torso. In fact, you can readjust kind of how you're sitting, your sit bones, so you can create a nice neutral spine initially. Turn and face your right leg, and then very slowly begin to fold and round. So this is the Yin version. So relaxing our muscles and letting our spine round over this posture, over this leg. And this is where you can use props. So if you tried to do that and you didn't go very far, if you have a firm bolster, and this is kind of what's going on in your posture and it feels very, very unstable in your head and your neck, you can take this bolster and you can just rest your head and your neck on the bolster. Maybe you're a little bit lower and you can take a block or something. Or if floating, I kind of float and I'm fine with floating, but for some of us, it's not going to work here. So we'll stay here for a few minutes. A modification to this, if the Dragonfly legs is a little bit too dramatic, particularly in the opposite leg, you can always bend this knee. Bring this heel into this hip. Now this is basically known as half butterfly pose. So you can do this posture this way with the knee bent. And maybe that makes it a little bit more tolerable. In which case it's the half butterfly version of this forward fold rather than the Dragonfly version. So that's one option here. And then we'll just stay here. Now this might be a little bit more intense, so now it's time to go over the 3 principles of Yin. Here, the first principle is finding your edge. What is the width of your legs? What is the bend in your knees? How far forward can you bend forward here? Here, that's all part of this exploration of yoga practice, which is finding your own stopping points. Finding that place where you're stopping and you're feeling something, but it's not injurious, it's not too far here. Second principle is called stillness. Once you've discovered where that place is, then give yourself permission to soften and settle and stay for a while. That's the stillness part. Without jumping in and out of the posture. You can adjust, you can make constant adjustments as you figure out where your edge is. You're just trying to stay in place so that you give your chance for the stillness to soften the muscle fiber here. Third principle is time. So we're trying to let the traction that's created here soak into the connective tissue system that's not loaded with as much with nerve endings and blood vessel endings, which all tend to go to the muscle fiber. So it's kind of harder to feel. That's why you need a yoga practice, so that you give yourself permission to concentrate on this. So about 1 more minute on this side of a dragonfly. Give yourself permission to come out early if you need to. Give yourself permission to go deeper and stay longer if you want to too. You have to kind of adjust this for your practice here. So the star Eta Carinae it's kind of in the plane of the Milky Way. So you see that bright milkiness of stars. That's the plane of our own galaxy, and we're looking in that direction. We're looking at the Sagittarius arm when we look at Eta Carinae. And Eta Carinae is embedded in its own nebula. So some people may not know Eta Carinae as a star, they may know it as a nebula. If they're an amateur astronomer and they look at through a small telescope, you can actually see a nebula, kind of fainter but similar to maybe Orion Nebula, which is a more famous nebula here. But there is a star there. And again, it's visible to the naked eye. You can actually see it, but it's not bright. So you have to know what you're looking at. So it might take a while to learn where this star is. So 1 more breath here, and then slowly bring yourself up. You might have to bring your legs out of dragonfly legs for a while to let them kind of rest and recover, or maybe make some motions with your torso if that turned out to be really achy here. So again, give yourself plenty of counter pose time. But if you're ready to do the other side, what I'm going to do is just go ahead and turn and face the other leg here, and then fold over the left leg now, or the other leg here. And again, you can do the same thing. You could, if half butterfly feels so much better on this side, then go ahead and bend this knee, fold this ankle in on this side, do half butterfly instead of dragonfly. Otherwise, if dragonfly is working for you, then maybe stick with dragonfly here. And we'll stay here for another few minutes or so. But Eta Carinae is a very, very interesting star to astronomers. It's visible to the naked eye now at about 4th magnitude, which is very unremarkable. And it was in the distant past 4th magnitude. In fact, it was such an unremarkable star, it wasn't officially cataloged in anything formal until the 17th century, until basically Edmund Halley, who predicted the period of Halley's Comet. He didn't discover Halley's Comet, he just figured out that this one comet was the same comet. He was an astronomer back in the 1600s. So in 1677, Edmund Halley was in the southern hemisphere formally cataloging stars, and he was the first European to catalog Eta Carinae as a 4th magnitude star. At the same time, or roughly the same time, in China was cataloging southern stars, and they also cataloged Eta Carinae as this unremarkable fourth magnitude star. It turns out later, in the 1800s, Eta Carinae began to brighten dramatically. And in the 1840s, Eta Carinae became the 2nd brightest star in the entire night sky. It was almost as bright as Sirius itself. It was brighter than Canopus. So if you're familiar with Canopus, this would have stood out, because now there's a star in the same area as Canopus that's actually brighter than Canopus. This is known by astronomers and historians as the Great Eruption. Something dramatic took place at Eta Carinae, and we know a little bit more about it now, because now we've studied Eta Carinae and see the after effects of that what's known as the Great Eruption. It's also known as a pseudo supernova. because it doesn't quite fit the parameters of a supernova explosion. But because the star didn't destroy itself, the star, or stars, as we'll find out, it's actually got more than one star, they still survived that whole explosive event in the 1840s. So about 2 or 3 more breaths here on this side. Meanwhile, after the eruption in the 1850s and 60s, the star faded from view. In fact, it wasn't even 4th magnitude. You couldn't see it at all with the naked eye for a very long time. In fact, it wasn't until the 1940s that the star started to brighten again, and it steadily is brightening until, to this very day, it's back to its normal 4th magnitude self. Again, a star that we can see with the naked eye here. So slowly begin to bring yourself up. And then once your torso's up, maybe you need to do a back bend or some twists. Maybe your dragonfly legs are really, really done. So slowly bring them in one at a time. And then you can maybe do a little bit of motion to work out the kinks here. And then from here, we'll move into a posture known as melting heart pose. That's the yin name for the posture. A more common name is puppy dog pose. This is a back bend here. So from here, we'll make your way onto hands and knees. There'll be an alternative for this posture. Make your way onto table pose. Knees the stable width apart. Maybe they're hip width, maybe they're wider than hip width here. Hips initially are over your knees just to generate height, because our spine is going to sag down onto the floor. And then slowly lower your torso as you walk your extended arms forward here until yours, and then maybe arms go a little bit wider than shoulder width, and you lower your torso down until things start to stop. So this is a back bend that can often get intense up into the upper body. So I often call this an upper body posture and a back bend posture. This is where folks this is where you're actually trying to feel this pose here. Now this can be a little bit too intense in the shoulders here. So when you find your stopping point, maybe your forehead is on the ground, maybe your chin is on the ground. Maybe you have to adjust your arms here a little bit here. Maybe you have to adjust your knees and legs to feel more stable in the back here. Or if you're feeling too much, if this is just for some people, this is just not going to happen in their shoulders. This is just too intense. So if you have your version of this posture, stay here. Staying here for a few minutes. But an alternative to this is where you get your handy blanket roll that I suggested at the beginning of class. I call this hard opening on a blanket roll. You'll take your blanket roll, place it crossways on your mat, and then come to lie on your back with your upper back right on the blanket roll. So I usually like to set my shoulder blades or just right before my armpits where the blanket roll is. And this creates kind of a nice gravitational pressure that's similar to what you might be feeling in melting heart pose. Arms are comfortable. You can put a pillow under your head. I'm going to lean my head back here like this, but if this is too awkward for your head and your neck, then grab your pillow. Place the pillow under your head and your neck. So this is a nice alternative if melting heart ends up being just a little bit too intense here. So I'll come back into some version of melting heart here for about another 2 minutes or so. So when we started to develop sophisticated astronomical equipment to observe the universe with, Eta Carinae was a very interesting star to study because of this weird variability. It would become a bright star and then it would fade away. And the more we studied it, the more we realized it was a massive star that we couldn't really see because it was obscured in its own shroud of gas and dust, that it was kind of blowing off its outer atmospheres. In fact, it's a really hard star to study because you can't see it directly. It's hidden. It's hidden in its own micronebula. The nebula is known as the homunculus. The homunculus, it's kind of hard to pronounce. Homunculus nebula is this small double-lobe structured nebula that surrounds the star. And for a long period of time, we thought there were just one supermassive star hidden in that nebula. In fact, it wasn't until 2005 that astronomers realized that there were actually more than one star. There's actually two supermassive stars hidden behind that nebula. And the nebula itself is what's glowing at fourth magnitude. That's what we see in the sky. The stars are putting out so much radiation that all the re-radiated and reflected emission out of the nebula makes it so bright. Who knows how bright the stars would be if they weren't shrouded in their own cocoon of material here. So a couple more breaths here. If you're doing heart opening on a blanket roll, or if you're doing melting heart, slowly going to come out of this posture. So the counter pose to this is full child's pose. So root through your hands and your arms and slowly push yourself up and then push yourself back into child's pose. Now arms can be forward, but maybe your arms need a break. So I'm going to suggest full child's pose. Sweep your arms back, lower your torso, and let your shoulders sag forward. Release the muscles there. And that might feel kind of nice after your shoulders were pushed back during that melting heart pose here. So a couple of breaths here, just to counter melting heart pose. And then when you're ready, slowly bring yourself up. Doing a little bit of a prep pose before we get into the eye of the needle twist here. And that is make your way onto your back. And we'll do some reclined windshield wipers. So make your way onto your back. Feet are far apart from each other, much like the internal rotation pose that we were resting in at the beginning of class. So feet move away from each other. Maybe they find the edge of their mat. And then just gently lower the knees to one side, bring them back up to center, and then they both roll over to the other side. And just a few cycles here. And this is just to kind of prep and set up for the next yin posture, which is a combination of eye of the needle pose and a spinal twist here. So knees come back up to center. Bring your feet back together for a moment. Knees are bent, and then bring the right leg in towards your torso. Put the right ankle on the left thigh. Right knee comes out wide here. So this is eye of the needle pose. We're going to add a twist to this. So bring the left leg in slightly. You can use your hands to help. And then take the whole leg and hip apparati. You can use your hands here and guide them gently over to the left. And maybe the right foot touches the ground here. Allow your right arm to open up like an outrigger, extended out in a T or cactus arm position to help encourage this right shoulder to lower to the right. The left arm can be in a T or a cactus arm position too. Or if you want to, you can take the left hand and just kind of clasp the right foot here. Head can be neutral, or you can turn your head to the left if that's okay with your neck. And then we'll stay here for a few minutes. An alternative to this posture, if this is just too kind of funky and weird here, but you'd like to, the main purpose is the spinal twist. So if you want something that's maybe a little bit more straightforward and accessible. Undo the eye of the needle legs and just bring the knees and thighs parallel to each other. And then just do this more straightforward spinal twist with the knees together like this. Otherwise, you'll have the additional maybe feelings of a slight hip opener on outside of the hip if you have eye of the needle legs here. And we'll stay here for a couple more minutes on this side here. So the more this star is studied, first of all, we now know how far away it is. So this whole star system is 7,500 light years from the Earth. That's really far to actually see, to see an individual star system. So most of the stars we see in the night sky, they're anywhere from 10 to about 1,000 light years away. This system is 7,500 light years away. So the fact that we can even see it with the naked eye means it must be pretty bright and therefore pretty massive here. I'll just remind you that a light year is 6 trillion miles. So it's 7,500 times 6 trillion. So you can do the math, add lots of zeros to the 6 trillion to get an idea of how far away the system is here. It's a young system compared to our sun, but it's made up of massive stars that go through their fuel, their stellar fuel very quickly. So even though both stars in the system are believed to be only 3 million years old, keep in mind the sun is 5 billion years old, they're evolved, which means they're running out of fuel because they're so huge. They burn through their fuel so quickly. Of the two stars, the smaller star is 30 times more massive than the sun. That's a small star. If it was by itself, it would be considered a mega giant star in its own right. The bigger companion is thought to be 120 times more massive than the sun. So a true juggernaut. In fact, the Eta Carinae system is by far the most massive star system that we see or know about in the galaxy. We suspect there's probably a few dozens of these megastars in the galaxy. But Eta Carinae is the only one we can see, so it's the only one we can study. This is why this star system is so famous, at least in science, because it's the one example we have of a close hyperstar system of these two giant stars that are just incomprehensibly larger than the sun. 120 times the sun is pretty incomprehensible. And that's what we believe has led to the great eruption back in the 1840s, was this massive, one of the massive stars throwing off lots and lots of material due to its huge instability here. So one more breath here. And then slowly bring yourself back to center. So you can take your hands and maybe help the legs back up, undo do the reclined, do the half eye of the needle. Maybe you need a little bit of time to work out the kinks or reverberate from that. And we'll set up for the other side here. So now you bring the left leg in, left heel goes on the right thigh for eye of the needle here. And then bring the right leg in, and then lower that your legs over to the right side until something stops them. Left shoulder's trying to stay on the ground. Arms can come out into T position, or the right arm can find the left foot. Left arm can be in cactus arm if that feels better, or you can experiment with sweeping this arm up and down and seeing if there's a more interesting place that you'd like the arm to be. Again, the head and neck can stay neutral. That feels better. Or you can turn the head and neck away from the twist here in the torso. We'll sit up here for another few minutes on this side. Again, this star system was hard to study because these two gigantic stars, even though they're supermassive, they have thrown off so much material. In fact, they've thrown off about 30 to 40 solar masses or stars worth of mass And they're hidden in that cocoon, they're hidden in that nebula, this homunculus nebula of this double lobe structure. So if you look up pictures of this on the internet of Eta Carinae, it's going to look like kind of a butterfly type structure. And that's the surrounding nebula material that surrounds the stars. You can't see because they're in the center of this nebula. They're in a highly eccentric orbit around each other. In fact, they pass close to each other they rotate around each other every 5.5 years. And the closest they get to each other is about the distance that Mars is from the sun. And then when they're farther apart, they're about the distance of the sun and Neptune. So that's kind of the distances that they share. And they actually affect each other. They're so big and so unstable. Every time they get close to each other, they start like interacting with each other and throwing off lots of mass. So they have like these mini eruptions and these mini events every rotation here. And it's believed that there might have been a third star involved, and the third star actually collided with one of the bigger stars, which caused the great eruption in 1840s. That's one of the theories behind what made the stars erupt greatly. One thing is known about the stars is they're so huge that when they do die, when they do run out of fuel, they will actually end in a supernova explosion. Now, luckily, they're 7,500 light years away, so the supernova explosion will be a very spectacular sight to people living in the southern hemisphere, because it'll be very bright. But it's so far away that there's no danger of any kind of harmful radiation reaching Earth, because it is a very, very distant system here. But it is an interesting system, and it gets studied by all the major telescopes. In fact, a lot of time has been spent with the Hubble Space Telescope looking at this system and trying to figure out in a little bit more detail what these stars are up to. Again, you can figure out a lot of things indirectly if you concentrate and focus on it. Even though these two stars can't be seen, we know a lot about these stars. Even though we can't see what we're feeling in a yoga posture, over time we can learn a lot about our own bodies by experiencing the sensations in these shapes that we make in the yoga practice. So there's the yoga tie-in is the more you pay attention to and the more you focus on something, the more you learn about it, whether it's your body or whether it's a hypermassive star system 7,500 light years away here. So one more breath here. And then after that next breath, bring the whole piece up again. Undo your eye of the needle legs here. And then from here, roll over to one side. Make your way up. And then a few cat and cows here. So just as a counter pose maneuver, come to hands and knees. And then maybe, let's start with cow pose. So cow pose is a back bend. Sink your belly, lift your heart here. And then cat pose is this arching of the spine. Sometimes people call this scared cat pose here. And then maybe a few cycles. This is just to help to work out the kinks in the torso. After those spinal twists, after those light hip openers, because we're going back into another hip opener. Next posture is happy baby pose here. So make your way back onto your back after a little bit of counter pose time here. Bend your knees, draw your knees into your chest, and then weave your arms in between your knees. Find your shins, your ankles, or the bottoms of your feet, and then point the bottoms of your feet up towards the ceiling. And then initially you can use your arms in a yang sense to pull on your feet and your shins to kind of push your knees down towards the floor. So this is your version of happy baby. By the way, if this is just too intense, you can always bend your knees, bring them into your torso, give your knees a hug. So this can be your version of happy baby here. Otherwise, we'll stay here for yin time. Happy baby is an interesting pose. So this is often included in a yoga practice as a sort of a counter or an integration pose. We stay here for a few breaths, and for a lot of us this feels nice. When you stay here for several minutes, it can turn into an entirely different experience as the intensity may grow in your hips here. It does for me. So that's just something to kind of observe here in this posture, or in your version of this posture here. So notice your breath. Notice where the sensations might be building here. And again, if this is not intense enough for you, you can always do experiments like straightening your legs or maybe rocking back and forth, but that's more of a yang type practice here. Here we're trying to feel the intensity but stay kind of still and quiet here. So it was believed in the great outburst that one of the stars lost an incredible amount of mass, and indeed created a lot of the gas and dust that's surrounding the stars and kind of hiding them. Now we can see the gas and dust that's illuminated by the stars with infrared telescopes that can sense the re-radiated heat from the stars. And we can see a lot of high energy emission. There's X-rays and ultraviolet light escaping from the stars and from the clouds. This is again with telescopes that see at those wavelengths, not just visible light. And we can see this butterfly nebula that is the leftover material of an outpouring of material from one of the massive stars during the Great Eruption in the 1840s. A lot of interesting radiation coming from the clouds itself. In fact, what astronomers have discovered is an ultraviolet laser. So the radiation from the star has excited the molecules and the atoms and the ions of hydrogen and oxygen and chromium and iron and magnesium to create a situation where ionized iron is in a state where it actually lasers. It behaves like a laser, and it creates ultraviolet laser light. And in fact, Eta Carinae is the only example that we know of that is its own ultraviolet laser. So it's the only example so far of an astrophysical laser, which is rather amazing, which is pretty peculiar. So it's science on science. It's basically ultraviolet laser created by a star rather than by a human here. So about 2 or 3 more breaths here in happy baby pose here. And then at some point you can release happy baby. A little bit of integration before we come into our final resting posture. I will suggest bridge pose, which is a yang posture here, just to work out some of the kinks of these yin hip openers and twists. So feet are on the floor, knees bent, you're lying on your back, and then arms extended along your sides, rooted into the ground for stability. Head and neck are neutral, and then on an inhale, use the inhale to engage your muscles to lift your hips up towards the ceiling, coming almost into a back bend here. You can clasp your hands underneath your low back and roll the top parts of your arm bones underneath your rib cage. And then for the next few breaths, use the inhale to kind of push your hips up as far as they go. Use a little oomph here. So this is not a yin posture. This is a yang posture here. So feet are pressing into the ground. Shoulders are pressing into the ground. One more breath, and then release your hands, release your shoulders, and slowly roll yourself down onto your back. When you get there, it's time for a little free-form yoga. So if there's any other little maneuvers that you would like to do, postures, exercises, movements, to work out any of the imbalances that started building during this yoga sequence. Then take some time to do that. And then when you feel ready, begin to soften and yet settle yourself into your final resting posture, your final Shavasana. I'm going to just practice a traditional Shavasana here, lying with arms and legs extended, maybe feet far enough apart so that your legs can roll either out or in, depending on what's more comfortable for you. Arms are extended and far enough from your waist so that your palms can face up here. Again, use props when needed. Maybe you need a blanket roll underneath your knees. Maybe you need a pillow underneath your head. Maybe you need a blanket for warmth here. So all of that stuff are useful props for this final yin posture of total relaxation. So once you have gotten yourself comfortable and stable and feeling secure here, then give yourself permission to let go. Give yourself permission to soften. So soften all the tension in your face. Release your jaw, your tongue, your teeth, the entire inside of your mouth. Soften the outside of your mouth. Soften your chin and your cheeks. Soften your ears and your nose. Soften the muscles that ring each eye. So soften the left eye socket and the right eye socket. Space between your eyes, your forehead, your temples, even the very top of your head. Allow your thoughts to be fuzzy and defocused. Allow your brain to soften here. Collarbones and shoulders are soft. Shoulder blades rooted into the floor, they're soft and they're kind of just melting into the floor. Right arm releasing, right hand, right fingers. Left arm, left hand, left fingers softening. Rib cage is releasing, abdomen softening. Hips relaxing, thighs, knees, lower legs, the shins and the calves soft. Ankles, heels, bottoms and tops of your feet. All of your toes releasing. Release, relax, and surrender your body, mind 100%. Maybe come back to this visualization of being a star, glowing bright, brilliant on every inhale, and allowing the outer layers, the unneeded layers, to just gently flow off with every exhale. At some point, begin to deepen your breath. Start to make small motions with fingers and with toes. Expand that motion into wrists and into ankles. Gentle motions with arms, with legs. Gently rock your head from side to side. At some point, gently bend your knees. And then slowly roll over onto your side. Stay there for a moment and consider your practice, consider your efforts. Maybe find some gratitude for your efforts, but also some gratitude for you, your unique embodiment in this universe. You're just as unique as the very interesting star system of Eta Carinae. The universe is ecstatically joyful that you're here. Then at some point, slowly begin to lift yourself up. Come to a comfortable seat. When you found your inner ground, bring your hands together at heart center. And I'll end this practice with an Om. The inner starlight in me honors the inner starlight in you. Namaste.